Hello, welcome to another episode of thefieldofscreamspodcast. Today we will be talking about John Carpenter's Halloween made in 1978, the very first Halloween movie. With only $320,000, John Carpenter made a movie that became the motivation for a lot of other slasher movies. I mean, this electrified the slasher genre. There were other slasher movies before this, but I mean, this movie made the slasher genre popular. We would not have Friday the 13th without this Halloween movie right here. I mean, the guy who made the first Friday the 13th literally said, we need to rip off of that movie. I mean, this movie is shown on TV every Halloween season. There's some people that can't go a Halloween without watching this film. This is an iconic film. But I probably don't have to tell you that if you are sitting here listening to this. And the real reason you came here is not for me to hype this movie up, it's to talk about this movie. So let's get started on that. I want to talk about the beginning of this film. I mean, a lot of people remember it. Of course, it has that POV shot of Michael literally coming back into the house. He's looking through the window. His sister and her boyfriend are making out on the couch. She leads the boyfriend upstairs. And we see the point of view of Michael. He's going around the house, goes through the back door, pulls out a kitchen knife. And I mean, the sister and her boyfriend were literally upstairs for like 15 seconds. And then he's like, all right, I gotta go now. And his sister doesn't have a shirt on. So whatever happened upstairs lasted literally 7 seconds. But luckily for the boyfriend, he exits the house before little Michael goes up there. And Michael goes up to his sister, who does not have a shirt, and he stabs her repeatedly. He kills her. The one thing that kind of made me laugh on this rewatch here is we get that point of view shot of Michael looking at his sister while he's stabbing her. But then there's a moment in the movie where literally he looks away. He looks to his right as if he wants to look at his arm as he's rearing back and stabbing her. He's looking in the corner of the room. It really doesn't make sense if we're seeing what Michael's seeing, why he wouldn't be looking at his sister while stabbing her, and instead looking at the corner of the room. And then he's like, oh yeah, I was stabbing my sister. I should probably focus on what I'm hitting. And then he eventually goes outside to where his parents pull up, and he's standing there covered in blood, and his parents are just like, hey, what happened? And then as the camera fades away to black, which it's a really cool, cold open shot, but it's also kind of funny of just watching the parents stare at Michael. I mean, you hear them say, like, Michael, what'd you do? And they, like, tilt their head and they're acting normal. But then it's almost like they turn to mannequins as the camera fades away. And I don't know if that was intentional to try to make it extra creepy or not. But to me, it was just kind of goofy. I was like, what are they doing? Like, they're not even moving a muscle. No one's talking. Michael's staring at the camera. But I don't know, we fade away, and then we go to what is considered present day in the Halloween movie. We do get the little scene when Dr. Loomis is in the car with Nurse Marion Chambers. They're going to pick up Michael Myers. I forget what the specifics were. Basically, Nurse Chambers is like, why don't we just keep him here? Why do we got to transport him? And Dr. Loomis is like, because it's the law. And I'm guessing they're taking him to a court hearing. But Dr. Loomis does a good job of painting what exactly we're dealing with Michael. He even says like he spent like 7 years trying to understand Michael Myers. And then he spent 8 years trying to keep him locked up and from reaching society. I think that's the right amount of years. If I'm wrong, someone please correct me. Go ahead. When they pull up to the sanitarium, though, one shot that I thought that was really cool, and I wish they did a little more with, is when all the patients are literally walking around in the field. Like, all the patients got loose. I'm guessing that was Michael's doing. But yeah, like, it's a dark scene, it's raining, it's kind of a creepy environment, and then you just see all these mental patients just wandering around in the darkness. A really cool, awesome shot. I don't know what they could have done more with that. But I mean, just the imagery of them wandering around, that was great stuff. And great stuff to start a scary movie with. Then, of course, when Loomis leaves the car, Michael kicks the nurse out of the car, basically scares her out. And then he takes the car and takes it towards Haddonfield. And you kind of figure out as this movie gets going that Michael likes to cruise around a lot. I'll talk about that a little bit more because we need to talk about our other characters. But once Michael takes off, Loomis starts his little adventure back. And I mean, like, as we get our little bits with Loomis, I mean, Dr. Loomis is the ultimate hype man. Donald Pleasance is just such a good actor, and every time he goes into a little dialogue of how evil Michael is, he is just such a good talker, such a good speaker. And when he talks about him having the dark, evil eyes, the devil eyes, all pale, no emotion, blank stare. If it was a bad actor playing this role, I don't know if this movie would be as successful as it is. I mean, Loomis carries a good chunk of this movie. And don't get me wrong, like, Carpenter does a lot of good things with the shadows and how they have Michael Myers move. But I mean, it is really hard to replace Dr. Loomis. And I feel like we find that out in the later sequels. Because once Dr. Loomis kind of goes, it just feels like something's missing. But I mean, I'll digress here. We're talking about the first movie. I just want to get the point across that, Loomis, when he gets talking and hyping Michael up, talking about the evil things that he's done, it is just awesome scenes. And Donald Pleasance, once again, he rules the screen when he's talking. We eventually meet 3 girls who we follow around in this movie. Also, we have Laurie, who is our main character, our final girl of this film. Then we have our friends Linda, who loves to say the word totally, and we also have Annie, who I think Annie is a little mean-spirited, maybe because it's the sheriff's daughter, Sheriff Brackett. But Annie just kind of strikes me as a rebel. I mean, she is a rebel. There's not a part in this film where she's not rebelling or kind of doing what she's supposed to do. I mean, those 3 girls, they are walking. And I mean, they really want to get the point across that Laurie's a nerd. Jamie Lee Curtis, fantastic actress. This movie, got her big gig. But there's times in this movie where her dialogue just kills me. Like, oh, I gotta study for a test. Oh, I forgot my chemistry book. And then Annie's like, oh, I never bring my chemistry book. And then Laurie will have some response like, you guys think I'm too smart, don't ya? And it's just like, man, this is Jamie Lee Curtis here, the lady who's known as a fantastic actress. I guess it's not her fault. She was very young while doing this movie, and there are a lot of good scenes that she does in this movie, but there's just some dialogue where it just kind of cracks me up because they are overplaying the nerd bit to the core. While we follow around these 3 girls, John Carpenter does a good job with, there's a term called stingers, I believe was what it's called, just a very high-pitched sound. Whenever there's a movement in a movie, its whole purpose is to scare you or maybe give a nice jump scare. And there's a lot of moments for this, especially like when the girls are walking or another character's just sitting there and all of a sudden Michael just kind of zooms in from the background. They do a great job having Michael hide in the shadows, and even when there's not shadows in pure daylight. Michael peering around that hedge bush. It's an iconic shot. A lot of people know what you're talking about if you just say like, oh, Michael was hiding behind a bush. Like, they're picturing that scene with Laurie and Annie walking. There is the little scene, and of course, I talked about how Michael was stalking them. And again, I just kind of want to joke that like Michael is also cruising around town chasing them, but there's a scene to where Laurie and Annie are in the car, and Annie convinces Laurie to smoke weed with her. So they're both smoking weed, so I guess Laurie isn't too big of a nerd. But even when they are, Laurie starts coughing, and Annie's like, oh, really? Are you coughing? Come on. And she's like basically telling her to toughen up or whatever. But while that's going on, they're driving the car, and Michael Myers starts cruising around behind them, and the radio starts playing, and I think it was Don't Fear the Reaper as soon as he comes up behind them. That's just a nice touch during that scene. But of course, Michael has to peel back a little bit because Annie sees her dad and they have to hide the weed. And Sheriff Brackett, he comes up and he tells them about a robbery. And then it's during this moment we find out that's where Michael gets the mask, the knives, rope he talks about. Michael got rope, which is later used to hide his killed victims. And we even know where he got his jumpsuit from, because when Loomis comes across that mechanic out in the field, the guy is missing his mechanic clothes. So it's just a very quick way of telling how Michael got his look. Eventually, Laurie and Annie, they have to go babysit. Laurie has to babysit Tommy Doyle, and Annie has to babysit Lindsay Wallace. And whenever they're driving there, of course, Michael is tailing them. He's just cruising behind them. And by this point in the beginning of the film, Michael has been cruising around a lot. And part of me wonders, what song does Michael like to cruise to? You know, everyone has their song they like to drive to. Maybe Michael was listening to something like, get out of my dreams, get into my car. And like Michael's just like bobbing his head, just jamming out to it. Maybe Michael didn't even mean bad things until Annie screamed at him, speed kills. Because, Michael is literally just cruising around town. And it's until the moment that where Annie looks at him and says, speed kills! And Michael slams on the brakes. Like, the car comes to a screeching halt. And that's when the pursuit really begins. So, maybe Michael never had bad intentions until Annie said those words. And that's what just tipped him over the edge. Just a thought. Both those girls are babysitting. And Annie, of course, she gets a call from her boyfriend. The boyfriend wants to go mess around. So Annie's like, I need to dump this kid onto Laurie. So Annie goes over to the house that Laurie's at. And she basically manipulates Laurie into taking her kid also. And Laurie's like, what? Come on. And even before the scene when Annie calls Laurie, Laurie told Annie who her crush was. Okay, I'm kind of jumping around a bit. So, in the beginning of the movie when they're in the car smoking, Laurie admits that she has a crush on a guy named Ben Tramer. This was a real friendship moment. Laurie trusted Annie with it. Later on, while Annie's babysitting, she calls Laurie and she tells Laurie that she told Ben Tramer that she has a crush on him. Which, embarrasses Laurie, obviously. Laurie doesn't have much confidence because she's a movie nerd and all she wants to do is read her chemistry book. And it's kind of funny while she's telling her because she tells Laurie that, and then Jamie Lee Curtis, I feel like John Carpenter was like, listen, we got things we need to film. Like, just kind of fill the dead space with, like, being really disappointed and just saying, come on, Annie. Because, the next, 2 minutes, it's Jamie Lee Curtis just going like, oh, Annie, no. How could you? Oh, no. Annie, please tell me you're kidding. You're kidding. Annie, no. This goes on for quite a bit. And it made me laugh a little bit. But, of course, when Annie wants to dump the kid on Laurie, she goes and her and Laurie are going back and forth. Laurie's like, no, you can't dump another kid on me. And Annie's like, I'll tell you what. If you take this kid, I'll think about talking to Ben Tramer and telling him I was just kidding. And then Laurie accepts it immediately, like the worst negotiator ever. And then as Annie walks away to go meet up with her boyfriend, Laurie kind of smirks and she's like, oh, this old Girl Scout still has it. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, that was the worst deal ever. She said she might consider telling him it was a joke. Like, she should have never told him in the first place. That was a bad friend. But I digress. Annie does get some instant karma, though. Because as soon as she gets in the car, Michael is in the back seat, waiting for her, and he starts strangling her. And as he's strangling her, like, all you hear is the struggle between them two. Like, it is a pretty disturbing scene, especially from the time. I bet it freaked people out. And then, as soon as she starts honking the car horn, Michael stabs her, and obviously kills her. And Michael, he's very rusty at hiding bodies because he literally just takes her body and walks it up to the house to set up his little, artistic positioning of killings that he always does. Laurie's other friend, Linda, and her boyfriend, they soon reach out to Laurie, and Laurie explains to them that Annie dumped the kid on her, and Annie went to go hang out with her boyfriend, so Linda and her boyfriend realize that, they're kind of on their own, and they're going to go partying themselves. So they go and they start doing the deed, and of course Linda flashes her boobs, that's where we see that scene. And her boyfriend Bob, he's like, oh, I'm going to go get a beer. Or maybe Linda tells him to get a beer, I can't remember. But either way, he goes to get a beer. So he goes in the kitchen, and of course Michael Myers is waiting for him. He chokes him, stabs him, and he stabs him so hard that it pins him to the wall. And it is a really cool shot. It's probably the coolest kill in this movie. There's not a lot of kills in this first Halloween movie, and I will say Bob got the best kill. The next part cracks me up every time I see it. So after Michael Myers kills Bob, Linda's sitting in the room still waiting, and Michael Myers literally puts a sheet over his head and takes Bob's glasses and puts it on top of this sheet. It is really goofy looking, and I feel like it is not knocked hard enough just of how goofy it makes Michael Myers look. I know it's a disguise so that Linda thinks that it's Bob, but I don't know, I just can't help it. And even when he attacks Linda when she's later on the phone with Laurie, him being under the sheet with the glasses, I can't take it. I can't take it serious. But Linda ends up getting killed too, which means Michael Myers is on the direct route to attack Laurie. And now the showdown with Laurie and Michael, the very first movie, it's a good showdown because it is just dark scenes, whether Laurie's going up and down the stairs, out in the streets. Now, there's a point where she's running in the street screaming, help, someone please help me. She's going door to door, pounding on the doors. No one's answering. It's literally like that nightmare, to where something's after you. You're doing all that you can to try to get help, but there is no one around to answer your calls. You are on your own. And that is what Laurie is facing with Michael Myers. She does a good job standing off with them. She fends him off once, and then another time when she's hiding in the closet, she takes that little clothes hanger and stabs him in the eye. During this chase scene, Michael Myers, he gets knocked down or he gets stabbed, and he's on his back, and it shows Laurie kind of run out, and then in the background we just see Michael Myers slowly rise up in an upright position. Really cool scene there too. Overall, the chase scene was great, and of course Loomis, my man Loomis, comes in and shoots him 6 times, which knocks him off the balcony, and that puts him out in the grass where he's supposedly dead. Now, there was a running theme with Tommy Doyle, the kid that Laurie was babysitting. The kids at the school talked to him about the boogeyman's coming, and there's just different times to where Michael Myers is referred to as the boogeyman. That kind of became his nickname as the franchises went. And even at the very end of the movie, Laurie and Loomis talk about, Laurie's like, is he the boogeyman? And Loomis is like, actually, he is. So it's just kind of a cool theme. The story was supposed to just be about a guy stalking a babysitter. Very simple premise, but it's just unique enough and mysterious enough to make it cool, the whole boogeyman origin. People are into it. Michael Myers has a cool look. This movie does a lot with very little. Again, it's a simple story, but it's just done so well that people just love to return to this movie year after year, and it has spawned this ginormous franchise. This movie gave us a great killer. It gave us Laurie Strode, which the franchise returns to a lot. And it gave us Donald Pleasance. It gave us Sheriff Brackett. Well, Sheriff Brackett's kind of a smaller character, but also bigger. Whenever people talk about the movies, they love talking about Sheriff Brackett, even though his role isn't that big. But Loomis has a big role. There was parts I didn't really mention in this podcast just because it would kind of interrupt flow. But Loomis came across a dog that Michael Myers ate. And it's just him talking about that. It provides enough imagery in your head, it makes it scary. And Loomis, again, is the ultimate hype man for Michael Myers. He narrates the evil so we can picture it in our head. He is the good versus the evil. I love Dr. Loomis, and I feel like every Halloween fan does. I've yet to meet someone who's like, oh, Dr. Loomis is so annoying. I don't know. I just feel like he's a lovable character. Well, this does mark the end of my review for the very first Halloween film. I do plan on covering the other movies. I marathon the Friday the 13th movies, which I covered before this. So I do want to continue the trend and go through the Halloween movies, which I think would be pretty exciting. So if you're a Halloween fan, you're in luck. Stay tuned. Feel free to subscribe so you know when the next one comes out. If you like this video, that helps me out a ton, and I would really appreciate that. So in the next episode, we will be joining Michael, Lori, Dr. Loomis and friends, and Halloween 2. Until next time.